10 years ago for $60,000. I could sell it today for $600. The illusion has become real. And the more real it becomes, the more desperate they want it. Capitalism at its finest.
How much is enough, Gordon?
The richest 1% of this country owns half our country's wealth, $5 trillion. 1/3 of that comes from hard work. 2/3 comes from inheritance, interest on interest accumulating to widows' idiot sons. And what I do, stock and real estate speculation. It's bullshit. You got 90% of the American public out there with little or no net worth. I create nothing. I own. We make the rules, pal. The news, war, peace, famine, upheaval, the price of a paperclip. We picked that rabbit out of the hat while everybody sits out there wondering how the hell we did it. Now, you're not naive enough to think we're living in a democracy, are you, buddy? It's the free market. And you're part of it.
Peace and blessings, beautiful souls. I am Brandi L. Bates, and you are now tuned into Power Podcasts. Thanks for joining me. You can find me on Twitter at Soledad Francis and on Instagram at Brandi is Winning. And most of these talks can be found on YouTube, hashtag Power Podcasts. And of course, please follow, subscribe, and share on brandibates.podomatic.com, SoundCloud, and iTunes. Today we're talking about digital slavery and the free radicals. Digital slavery and the free radicals. Today we have what I like to call a modern day David and Goliath situation, with David being a representation of the free radicals, the misfits, the rebels, and independent thinkers, independent intellectuals who have always been at the forefront of revolutions throughout history. And then there's Goliath, who is a representation of the global multinational central bank. Okay? Now, Dr. Rebecca Spang said, "Money is and always has been political. Our central concern should not be with money's technology, but with the political and legal framework within which it operates." Again, Dr. Rebecca Spang. And I'm talking from that point because understand that the goal of the bankers, namely central banking, the Fed, wants a one world government, one world cashless currency, again, governed by the central bank. Okay? How do I know this? How do you know this? How do you know this? Where are all money would be easiest controlled? Where can all the wealth of the people be stored and monitored and controlled other than the bank? Okay? So the agenda, the end game would be all of your money, all of my money, all of our wealth, all of our assets would be uploaded into a cloud or uploaded into a chip or your RFD chip, And when the bank wants to take taxes or fines or fees or whatever, you have a warrant, you have a bench warrant, you have a ticket, they can just deduct it from your account via your chip. And so we're talking today about the real life mark of the beast. The end goal is to have a one world government where all of society is ultimately controlled by one central basic universal income, where people can't create their own stock markets or have their own rights or property or coin their own currency. And so they want a one world government controlled by them, everybody being chipped, all your money in those chips, and they control the chips. They control the coin. Thus, they control people. and you become a slave, and you become a serf to those in charge. And if you're like me or other free radicals and you're protesting what they're doing, they can just turn off your chip and you'll have nothing. You can't buy food. You can't do anything. It's total control of the people. Control will be both analog and digital. So when I say digital slavery, that's just a term so you can understand the gist of what it ultimately is. But the currency according to this agenda I'm talking about, is a slow burn, not a total overnight collapse. So a lot of people mention or make mention of, Babylon falling overnight. What is the one event that's going to cause Babylon to fall? And I'm saying it won't happen in the way you're thinking. It's happening before our eyes. We are living in that time of the mark of the beast, and we're living in the time of a slow burn of currency worldwide. Ultimately, the goal is, people are kept on a continual hamster wheel, which is what we see more and more often, the rat race. And most of you are in the rat race, right? To fund student loans, your credit card payments, your car notes, your mortgages, your personal loans, living hand to mouth, where all your income is going to survival or rent and food. So as soon as you make it, it's spent. And kept constantly, people are kept constantly taxed into oblivion. We're taxed when we buy goods, and taxed when we buy services, and taxed on property, taxed on income, so forth and so on. You're taxed coming in and you're taxed going out. And I'm here to say that wasn't always the situation in the United States or anywhere for that matter. That was a created faction. Benito Mussolini once said, fascism should more properly be called corporatism because it is the merger of state and corporate power. And we see that happening today. And so understand that the minds and the spirit and the ideas behind people like Mussolini and Adolf Hitler and Stalin and Lenin and Mao Zedong, they are still very much alive and well, but they're hidden and they're cloaked. And the scary thing that we're going to talk about today is that they're hidden and cloaked by companies and organizations, banks, schools, and things that we all have grown to love. But I'm going to expose them today. And it's up to you if you choose to continue to walk in darkness and continue to be a slave, or if you want to live free, right? Or die trying. Get your hands on Tim Wu's book entitled The Master Switch. The Master Switch, The Rise and Fall of Information Empires. It goes on to talk about how in this age of an open internet, it's easy to forget that every American information industry, beginning with the telephone, has eventually been taken captive by some ruthless monopoly or cartel. With all our media now traveling a single network, an unprecedented potential is building for centralized control over what Americans see and hear. Could history repeat itself with the next industrial consolidation? Right? Could the internet, the entire flow of American information, come to be ruled by one corporate leviathan in possession of the master switch? That is the big question of Tim Wu's path-breaking book. And it's not just, the United States of America, folks. This is also affecting countries in Europe, many countries in Africa. If you don't know, China is now currently colonizing many countries in Africa. And we see a rise in the Arab nations still living out the horrors and atrocities of chattel slavery. This is still going on in 2017, 2018, folks. So as Wu's sweeping history shows in this book, each of the new media of the 20th century, radio, television, telephone, and film, was born free and open, just like the internet. Each invited unrestricted use and enterprising experiment until some would-be mogul battled his way to total domination. And so here are stories of an uncommon will to power, the power over information. You had Adolf Zukor, who took a technology once used as commonly as YouTube is today and made it the exclusive prerogative of a kingdom called Hollywood. NBC's founder, David Sarnoff, who, to save his broadcast empire from disruptive visionaries, bullied one inventor of electronic television into alcoholic despair and another, this one of FM radio and his boyhood friend, into suicide. And foremost, Theodore Vail, founder of the Bell system. So, Pacific Bell, Bell South, the greatest information empire of all time, and a capitalist whose faith in Soviet-style central planning set the course of every information industry thereafter, explaining how invention begets industry and industry begets empire, a progress often blessed by government, typically with stifling consequences for free expression and technical innovation alike. And so Wu identifies a time-honored pattern in the maneuvers of today's great information powers. So you have Apple, Google, and an eerily resurgent AT&T. A battle royale looms for the internet's future. And with almost every aspect of our lives now dependent on that network, right? This is one war we dare not tune out. Folks, pay attention to this war for net neutrality. Pay attention to the distractions and what is going on in the controlling powers that be, the controlling administration of the most powerful countries. Look at your Russias, look at your United States, Japan, China, United Kingdom, so forth and so on. So part industrial expose, part meditation on what freedom requires in the information age, the master switch is a stirring illumination of a drama that is played out over decades in the shadows of our national life and now culminates with terrifying implications for our future. So, here we see a history of constant centralization. And the centralization of information, could that happen again? Could that be what we are seeing? Tim Wu is a professor at Columbia Law School, and he's best known for his development of net neutrality. And so after the chaos that follows a major technological innovation, a corporate power often intervenes and then centralizes control of the new medium. That's the concept of the master switch. The master switch. Those decisive moments when a medium opens or closes, from the development of radio to the internet revolution, where centralizing control, digital slavery, folks, could have devastating consequences. The day before September 11th, $2.3 trillion disappeared. $2.3 trillion disappeared the day before September 11th. And let me just say this, you're not going to hear this anywhere else. But September 11th, the reason why it will go down in history and why they place so much energy and numerology behind it is because September 11th marked the beginning and the bringing on of the digital age. That's when we leapt over the digital divide and entered into the digital age. And on that day, the day before that happened, money which has gone unaccounted for, which the DoD, Department of Defense, is the main culprit. And so the question is, who stands to benefit? There are no coincidences. When you are a part of one of the most powerful elite militaries, banking systems, banking families, cartels, drugs is another big one that funds a lot of this. But ask yourself, Qui Bono, who benefits? Who has the contracts? Who does the books? Then another $26 trillion. Again, count the figures, $26 trillion disappeared by the Federal Reserve without Congress's approval, permission, nothing. And these funds tend to always go towards corporate welfare and so-called black budget. Understand, society began in clans with a single leader to evolve into oligarchy control of the factions. Then it went to monarchy, dictatorships, and eventually democracy, then republics. These all contain forms of central controllers of the direction of such factions. And society now is transitioning towards decentralized forms of governance, beginning with the first successful implementation, Bitcoin. That's what we're seeing today, folks. Presumably, Bitcoin, it gives the control over to, this worldwide group of users dedicating their resources. They're called miners, right? As this type of system evolves, like we've seen again in the past, follow me, these groups begin to pull together, forming groups controlled by only a few people called mining pools. And then over time, these pools gain control over the governance structure of the blockchain. This could be compared to oligarchy control or control over the global network, to where the decisions of any changes are governed by votes, right, or blocks. And then they're put in the hands of a few people, deeming the fate of everybody else's resources who are invested into the system. Because absolute power corrupts absolutely every time. It doesn't matter if power is in the hands of the people. It doesn't matter if power is in the hands of small families. Absolute power has always corrupted. And so that's why we see, any form of collectivism. So understand, collectivism by any other name is still communism, socialism, Nazism. It's government control, right? Marxism, totalitarianism, etc., etc., etc. It never works. It has never worked in history, because there's always been, again, the group at the top who supposedly, we're here to manage and maintain control and maintain, order, but they're secretly lining their pockets. That's always been the case. And then you always end up with this small or large group of the masses who are working and they're driving the economy, but they are not reaping the benefits the way those at the top are. And so today you have the right to own property. You have property rights. You have civil liberties and the ability to own a business. You have, certainly in the United States, and you have the right and the freedom and liberty to be in business for yourself. And that's why it's such a great time to be alive. But what does abrogating millions of contracts look like? What does repealing programs look like? As the current administration is trying to repeal affordable health care and they've repealed net neutrality, ultimately you'd see the repeal of the following. You'd see the repeal then of military pensions, government pensions, Social Security disability, flood insurance, mortgage insurance, food stamps, housing subsidies, all you Section 8 folks and EBT, and we're gonna see these things slowly begin to be chipped away at. That's what it looks like in figuratively and literally. Now, blockchain and cryptocurrencies. I say all that to say, are we going to be shackled in blockchain? We see huge investment in space. You see it with all the major billionaires and top 1% of the population are investing in space, the colonization of space, with the end game being us being a multi-planetary system. So what we see here on Earth with globalism and globalization, they want to do in outer space. We see Chinese stock market is up like $7 trillion. And we see incomes in China are now converging with those of the US. That speaks volumes. The largest landowners in the US, their holdings are doubling and tripling. For those who don't know, one of the largest landowners in the United States, believe it or not, is McDonald's. McDonald's and the Queen of England are two of the largest landowners in the world. Just the more you know, shooting star. But digital currency is desirable because it gets us that much closer to a cashless society, and fast. We talking digital slavery, folks. Fast track straight to everyone's accounting and assets on a computer screen that can be manipulated, controlled, hacked, and or frozen. That's what we're talking about. And why are we going to war with North Korea? That speaks to that. It has nothing to do with North Korea having nuclear bombs, but because North Korea is one of the countries not controlled by the central bank. All countries not controlled by the central bank will be the source of force. They will be the source of colonization and aggression with wars of attrition. Mark my word. Attrition warfare, for those of you who don't know, is a military strategy where it consists of just this belligerent attempt to win a war by wearing down the enemy to the point of collapse through continuous losses in personnel and material, and the war will usually be won by the side with greater such resources. So they just outspin you. We see that happening in courtrooms all across the country, and we see it we see it in the world, on the world stage. We see this level of global warfare today. General Wesley Clark said several years ago, he said, we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years: Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. Now, it's worth noting that 6 out of these 7 countries, with the exception of Lebanon, identified by General Wesley Clark to be taken out, are now the object of President Trump's ban on Muslims' entry to the U.S. Stay woke, folks. So Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Libya, Sudan, Iran, and Yemen, and as I mentioned, North Korea. All of these countries are on the Pentagon's drawing board. These countries have been directly or indirectly the object of U.S. aggression, and they'll continue to be until they collapse and or sell out to the federal bank, to the central bank. We're talking about digital slavery today, folks. The central bank has a global monopoly on government. If you don't take anything else away from this talk, take this away. So, bubbles. Is Bitcoin a bubble? An asset bubble occurs when the price of a financial asset or a commodity rises to levels that are well above either historical norms or its intrinsic value, or both. First off, you got to understand what an asset is versus a liability. Okay? Assets versus liabilities. I can't cover it all. Go Google it if you don't know the bare basic, terms. The problem is that since the intrinsic value of an asset can have a very wide range, a bubble is often justified by the flawed assumption that the asset's intrinsic value itself has skyrocketed, or in other words, the asset is fundamentally worth much more than it was in the past. So, for instance, so the five of the largest asset bubbles we had in history we had the Dutch tulip bubble, the tulip mania in Holland. You had the South Sea bubble, it created more complex set of circumstances than the Dutch tulip mania. You had the Japan's real estate and stock market bubble. You had the .com bubble, That was the introduction of the internet in the 90s, which triggered this massive wave of speculation in this new economy and all these new businesses, right? All these .com businesses that didn't produce shit. They didn't produce a good. They didn't produce a service. They just were companies out there on the quote unquote internet, right? And hundreds of .com companies, they achieved multi-billion-dollar valuations as soon as they went public, right? And then they soared from a level of under 500 at the beginning of 1990 to a peak of over 5,000 in March of 2000. And the index crashed shortly thereafter. And it plunged nearly 80%. And it triggered a United States recession. We saw the U.S. housing bubble. And so even as house prices were increasing at a record pace, there were mounting signs of this unsustainable frenzy. You had rampant mortgage fraud, you had condo flipping, you had houses being bought by subprime borrowers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so basically the U.S. housing boom and bust and the ripple effects it had on mortgage-backed securities, or what they call derivatives, resulted in a global economic contraction that was the biggest since the 1930s depression, and it's what we call the Great Recession. But it's very important to go back and study some of these bubbles, these asset classes in history, to kind of get an idea of what is happening now and what will continue to happen. Understand that recessions and depressions are built into the fabric of the system. They build them into the system so that it works for, again, who is they when I'm saying they? Because I don't want to sound like a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. I'm going to give you facts. I'm going to give you science, and I'm going to give you math, and I'm going to give you receipts. Okay. So when you look at the power of blockchain, it has this seeming potential that, hey, this might be different than the others. This isn't going to be like the others, right? Well, however, we are likely on the verge of a tsunami of cryptocurrency bubbles filled with financial and cyber fraud. When this one goes bust, I believe it's going to create so much poverty that people will be blowing their brains out, especially for the people who are going all in, going all in on something you don't fully understand. That's the mark of ignorance. That's the mark of a fool. But where this bubble goes, we ultimately don't know for a fact, because it's so unique and different, because it's digital. Once innovations create blockchains and cryptocurrencies that can scale on an economic basis, we're off to the races with, global digital currencies. And so combined with cloud operations, this is the ultimate control system. Why? Understand that the global elite who own the banks, stay with me. Who are the global elite? I'm talking the top 1% of the world. The top wealthiest landowners, oil cartel families, Saudi family in the Middle East, the families that own all the diamond mines and the diamonds, and they own assets, they own gold, they own silver, they own land, they own rights to land, mineral rights, they own whole centralized resources like water and gas and fossil fuels, things like that. They love slavery. The global elite loves slavery. How do I know this? They funded and controlled the transatlantic slave trade hundreds of years ago. So when we talk about slavery and we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, people seem to think that we're so far gone away from that, and we're not. The difference now is that it's not just transatlantic, it's multinational. The difference now is that it's not just people with melanin in their skin. It's all people all around the world, all over the globe. But they funded it then and controlled it and maintained it then because what? They benefited then and they're benefiting now. They still control and maintain global digital slavery. That's my argument. That's my thesis. And I'd argue that Americans tend to think that only the South or only slave traders and slave owners benefited from slavery. But it was not that simple. Slaves and land were the main forms of wealth in the U.S. before 1860. So before 1860, you're talking about the 1700s, the 1600s, and even as early as the 1500s, slaves and land were how you got wealthy. Otherwise, you were in poverty. So you either owned slaves and you owned land, or you were a slave. You were ordered to work the land. Okay? Stay with me. Industry in the North and in Britain, today the United Kingdom, the Crown, the Vatican, they all made money processing slave-grown tobacco, cotton, sugar from the South and the Caribbean. Railway companies use slave labor. So when you hear about the great moguls, Andrew Carnegie and, these wealthy oil baron landowners and railroad companies, they used slave labor. They did not pay those people to build the fucking tracks and the railways, okay? They weren't workers. They were not paid money. They were not paid cash. They were slaves. And the most profitable activity on Wall Street was always the slave trade, because you had effectively free labor. So of course you're going to be, wealthy when you have all this labor for free and you don't have to pay them to do all the work. So who is they? Again, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I'm going to give you facts, I'm going to give you science, and I'm going to give you receipts. Who benefited? The same people who profited from the transatlantic slave trade. It's no secret that slavery rests at the foundation of American capitalism and is often synonymous with the sugar, tobacco, and or cotton plantations that fueled the Southern economy. And what many may not know is that slavery also rests at the foundation of many, many, many notable corporations. So all of your corporate media giants benefited from slavery, and they're still benefiting. And they benefit, and what they do now is they program you with propaganda. You're being programmed, even thinking, you may think, oh, well, I don't watch the news. I don't watch mainstream television, or I don't listen to mainstream radio. I don't listen to CNN or Fox News or what have you. But yet they have infiltrated social media. Believe me. The books that you're shown, the films that you're allowed to see, the films that are allowed to be produced, the music that you are constantly hearing. This is all done by design by people who have the money to say, this is what we want to be, this is what we want to be produced. And anything that goes against our agenda, what we're talking about, we don't want that to have any airplay. We don't want the people to read. We don't want the people to work themselves and buy themselves out of slavery. So you have all of your insurance companies and again, your banks. New York Life. New York Life found that its predecessor, Nautilus Insurance Company, they sold slaveholder policies during the 1800s. Bank of America. Yes, Bank of America. Many of us bank with them. We love Bank of America. Bank of America had ties to slavery and accepted slaves as collateral on loans. Tiffany and Company, the beautiful, beloved Tiffany blue box. Aetna insured the lives of slaves during the 1850s. Aetna reimbursed slave owners. So when the slaves died, they had insurance policies on these slaves and they got paid. So, they got paid by working the slaves for free, and they got paid when they died. See, they don't talk about this. We don't like to talk about this in our post-racial society. Brooks Brothers, Norfolk Southern, USA Today, Wachovia owned or accepted slaves as collateral on mortgage property or loans. Wells Fargo owned and accepted slaves as collateral. And they later became part of Wells Fargo by way of Wachovia. In the 2000s, there you had Wells Fargo targeting, again, Black people for predatory lending. Oh, we'll give you these free loans so you can go ahead and get your house. Well, then in 1 year, we're going to triple your the rate of your interest rate on your loan. And so where you had a lot of people paying, say, maybe $800 on a mortgage, after a year, it turned into, $5,000. And so this is the kind of games that Wells Fargo played. AIG purchased American General Financial, which owns U.S. life insurance company. AIG insured the lives of slaves. Lehman Brothers, whose business empire started in the slave trade, they recently admitted their part in the business of slavery. Okay. JP Morgan Chase accepted approximately 13,000 slaves as loan collateral and seized approximately 1,250 slaves when plantation owners defaulted on their loans. JP Morgan Chase. They made a fortune from the slave trade. And again, these same banks, all of these banks we've bailed out time and time and time again. They made their money on the backs of our ancestors, and then they're making their money again on the backs of all the American people who pay taxes. And Brown Brothers Harriman, a Wall Street bank that owned hundreds of slaves and lent millions to Southern planters, merchants, and cotton traders. Brown University, named for the Brown brothers who gave money to the university. Two were slave traders. Another ran a factory that used slave-grown cotton. The University Hall was built by slave labor. CSX, they rented slaves to build rail lines. Yes, the same way you can go rent a truck from Home Depot, they used to rent slaves. Harvard Law, beloved Harvard Law, endowed with money from Isaac Royal, an Antiguan slave owner and sugar grower. Princeton University, they raised money and recruited students from rich slave-owning families in the South and the Caribbean. And Princeton was not alone in hitting up slave owners and traders for money and students. So did, again, Harvard, Yale, Penn, Columbia, Rutgers, Brown, Dartmouth, and the University of Delaware. So you have all your Ivies, all your Ivy Leagues. By the middle 1700s, for instance, most Princeton students were the sons of slave owners. Many of Columbia's students were sons of slave owners. So this is where you start to see, who stands to benefit, who throughout history has maintained the system of oppression and slavery, not just chattel slavery, but now we see a digital form of slavery, a form of slavery with debt, because understand that debt is bondage. Because as long as you're in debt, we own you. Yeah, you're free to walk around. You just have a bigger cage. Your cage is not as small as, say, 4x4 foot cell, but it's a 4 foot by 4 foot cubicle now, because you're glued to that. Because you have to pay those student loans, you have to pay those credit card bills, you have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay your rent, you have to pay your car note, then you're taxed. Again, tax coming in, tax going out. And so very little of your money that you've worked hard for and earned is yours to keep. And this, folks, is digital slavery in the 21st century. Understand that looking at history, except for a brief period during the Civil War, the federal income tax was not a part of America's governmental system for almost 125 years. That's because our American ancestors understood that if the federal government had the authority to tax income, the American people would not be free. They understood that a free society necessarily entails the right of people to keep everything they earn without fear that the government can seize any portion of it. So imagine more than a century of American life without Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no farm subsidies, no welfare, no corporate bailouts, no FDIC, no Federal Reserve, fiat money, foreign aid, drug laws, immigration controls, economic regulations, public schooling, national security establishment, military-industrial complex, foreign military bases, regime change operations, coups, invasions, occupations. You know, you had your CIA flooding crack into the cities of Black and brown people in the 80s. And then you had your secret surveillance programs, your COINTELPROs, and now you have your NSA and you have your PRISM secret surveillance. You have your torture programs, assassinations, Pentagon, CIA, NSA. The list goes on and on. Taxes fund all of that. So when we talk about tax cuts and we talk about taxation, you have to take the good with the bad. You have to take the bitter with the sweet. And that means that, yeah, you may have a government that gives you free healthcare or free education, but what is the quality of that education? What is the quality of that healthcare? And even with healthcare, you have to be careful because you then no longer own the rights to your body. Once they have digitized all your records, they know everybody. If they could get everybody on the same, again, agenda where everybody's records are digitized, and now I need a kidney or I need a liver for a wealthy power elite, well, we know exactly where to go. Everything is mapped out on a computer screen. And I believe, this is another conversation that a lot of people don't like to have, but we saw the introduction of the federal income tax as a way to soothe the people once slavery was emancipated. So once essentially once the slaves were quote unquote freed, then the government turned around and said, hey, we're gonna now implement an income tax because we're not making that money from the free labor anymore, so we need to get it from you. That's what happened. And so that's why you have this back and forth push and pull between the North and the South and the conservatives and liberals and this mentality of nanny state versus those who want to be free and independent. But the American people now live under a government that wields powers that are inherent to totalitarian regimes. So when I say we still see the spirits and the ideas of Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini, they're very much real and very much alive. But they have moved on to a bigger stage now because they are multinational. And now they can hide behind the mask of government, quote unquote. And now things like Bitcoin, quote unquote, social media, different programs, they're all still those entities. They just wear different clothing now. So another book to get your hand on is The Devil's Chessboard. The Devil's Chessboard. Alan Dulles, The CIA and the Rise of America's Secret Government. It's an expose of American power that is as disturbing as it is timely. The Devil's Chessboard is a provocative and gripping story of the rise of the national security state and the battle for America's soul. So back to Bitcoin, and then I'm going to wrap it up and I'm going to let you go. Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrency, Litecoin, Bitcoin is not what it pretends to be, people. Bitcoin is not the currency for the people it pretends to be. And much of the hype around it is devised to help the central banking powers consolidate their gains and entice the population to use a digital currency. Because again, that takes us on the fast track straight to the cashless society. If we can get everybody to invest in Bitcoin, put all of their resources, put their house, put up their house for Bitcoin. Put up all their land, put up all their real estate, put up all their assets, their gold and their silver, and put everything into Bitcoin. Now we control it on a computer screen. And it can't be, you can't go into a bank and say, okay, I want to cash in my Bitcoin and I want to get a block of gold, or I want to use my Bitcoin to buy a piece of land. That doesn't happen. So it's all essentially the movement of numbers on a screen. And then we're seeing that anyway. That's why they're starting most jobs. They want you to have direct deposit. What if you don't want a bank? What if you say, yeah, I want to check, I want cash. It's not happening. Because they want to control your money. They want to be able to control and see what you earn, when you earned it, how much you earned, and then we can take out what we want to take out. Digital slavery. The current system of finance has no integrity, folks. And people who work with Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrencies, they know it's unsafe. They know it's subject to hacking with FDIC insurance, not to mention the IRS. See, people think they can deal with Bitcoin and not have to pay the piper, but the piper is propping up this so-called currency. So understand that cryptos basically are just another version of enslaved currency. Dark money runs the world. Dark money runs the world. Understand, dark money is the number one secret life force of today's rigged financial markets. It drives whole markets up and down. It's the reason for today's financial bubbles on Wall Street. Knowledge of and access to dark money means trillions of dollars per year flowing in and around global stock, bond, and derivatives markets. The dark money comes from central banks. That's where it comes from. And in essence, central banks print money or electronically fabricate money by buying bonds or stocks. They use other tools like adjusting interest rate policy and currency agreements with other central banks to pump liquidity into the financial system. And then they dump it. They've been doing this since the days of Rockefeller. They've been doing it since the days of the powerful Rothschild family. That dark money goes to the biggest private banks and financial institutions first. And from there, it spreads out in seemingly infinite directions, affecting different financial assets in different ways. Yet, these dark money flows stretch around the world according to a pattern of power, a pattern of influence, and of course, wealth for select groups. And you're not in that group. It's like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. And so to be a part of the dark money elite means to have control over many. And how elite? That's a matter of degree. That's a matter of degree, and that's a matter of pedigree. And it's to benefit their progeny. And so that's all I'm going to shed light on today. This is modern day David and Goliath. This is a reenactment of that. And don't be fooled. Collectivism by any other name is still communism, socialism, Nazism. And it's never benefited people of color. It's never benefited women. So when they want the slavery to look appealing, and they always have. And we think, oh, I'm free, and you're just being thrown into deeper, more subtle forms of bondage. Fiat currency, debt. That's the currency of slaves. We spend debt We transfer debt from one account to another. We transfer notes of debt. So think long and think hard. Keep God on your side, guys. Stay prayed up, meditated up. Not medicated. Meditate. Prayer and meditation. And keep God on your side. Thanks for listening. See you next week.